Hi everyone, my name is Elvis, and welcome back to another episode of LLM News, where I cover the exciting developments around LLMs and the world of AI. First up, we have the new announcements that were made at WWDC by Apple. So they are referring to all their AI innovation that they have done as Apple Intelligence. So I think that's very clever marketing off the bat. But we are going to go through an overview here of what they have proposed and maybe add some thoughts along the way and some of these features that they have introduced into their ecosystem. They did a few demos on how they use generative AI, like generative models, like image generation models and text-based LLMs. So it seems that they are really focusing on creativity and providing their users an ecosystem of generative AI experiences. And experiences is really the keyword here. So allowing users to have access to, for instance, in this case, to write with intelligent new tools. So regardless of the app, if it's mail, if it's notes, it should be possible to do this today in the Apple ecosystem. And this is what they're introducing. You can see they say Apple Intelligence powers new writing tools which help you find just the right words virtually everywhere you write. This is not different from you using something like Grammarly. And there was a lot of discussion about what happens to tools like Grammarly. I don't know. I have very little opinions about that. I think the AI ecosystem is changing, right? And the experiences are also changing. Now, when a company like Apple, which already have an ecosystem of applications, introduces tools like this, obviously we really have to pay attention because obviously they will replace certain tools that we probably already use. And so, that could happen with these companies, but I think there is a lot of different issues and more challenges that we still have to address. This is not perfect technology. And so I think it's still useful to think about maybe considering other solutions along with this and just experimenting. I actually saw an interview with Wozniak the other day, and he was talking about all this Apple Intelligence, and something that he mentioned really resonated with me, which was it's really important for people to try out these tools and to make an opinion about what these tools, how to use them in their daily lives. And so I think that's really important, right? To just test them out and see if it's resonating with you, if it's something that's useful for you. If it's not, then move on. There are other applications and maybe other solutions that you could consider. And I think that's the right approach, right? It's not like, okay, this will be perfect. It's more like testing it out and see if it's helping you and making you more productive because that is really what matters. And there are other little announcements here. I like this one, obviously, because I do a lot of like creative work, and art is one of those things that I do enjoy doing using the Apple ecosystem of apps. And so here there are a couple of features that were introduced. This is part of notes. So as you take notes, you can generate images as you go. And this is really useful for taking notes, like if you're in a class or a lecture and you're a person that learns visually, I think it's really powerful. And it's an interesting way how you can build rich experiences and make you more productive with these AI generative models. And this one was more about creating, again, images, unique Genmoji. This was something that was heavily discussed on Twitter and elsewhere, and custom memory movies. So generating more than just static images using AI and generative AI to generate richer types of content. And I think that's something that has happening throughout the space of AI, and Apple is doing, something like that as well. One interesting announcement that caught my attention was this new era of Siri, right? So Siri has been known to be this assistant that Apple has marketed for quite some time, and it's not a perfect assistant, right? It does certain things really well. It's very helpful as well, but it doesn't really have a lot of understanding of a lot of like daily tasks that you would perform, whether that be personally or professionally. So I was interested to find out like what exactly Apple was going to do around Siri. There was a lot of speculation, rumors about potentially some integration with other assistants that are powerful and can do a variety of tasks. And so what they announced is, which is I think not so surprising, is this integration with ChatGPT. ChatGPT doesn't need any introduction, But the fact that we can use ChatGPT inside Siri and these other writing tools that they're introducing is really interesting from a strategic point of view. Obviously, OpenAI benefits a lot because they get to plug into this massive ecosystem. They get users to test their models and be able to use them in the real world for real world tasks. So that's interesting from, I think, OpenAI point of view. But from Apple point of view, we have Siri. And Siri is supposed to be this great assistant. And my opinion about this is that, okay, maybe Siri could have solved a lot of these different problems, right? And make it interesting as what ChatGPT does, right? Because a lot of companies have done that too. Like we have all these chat models that we can use, and they're competing directly with OpenAI ChatGPT as well. So my expectation was, and I'm not really a power user of Siri, so I wouldn't really understand this, but the decision to plug into something like ChatGPT is like very confusing in a way when I first heard it. I think it makes sense, yes, because it now serves as some type of router where you can go to ChatGPT or you can go to any other assistant. But I always saw Siri as some form of assistant, right, to help you navigate through the different tasks and the different applications that you use in a day to day in your Mac. And that's how I saw Siri, right? There's some type of assistant that can help me complete tasks and can do all sorts of tasks and analysis and can memorize things and can understand photos, organize my information, and so on. But this is very different from that. And I am not sure if this is something that's going to remain long term, but I think it's interesting that Apple decided to fully integrate ChatGPT. And now, when you talk to Siri, Siri can decide for you whether it's necessary to use something like ChatGPT or it can solve the task. So, one last thing I want to add here with this ChatGPT integration, the first thing that came to mind for me was privacy. You can read exactly what they are doing. So you control when ChatGPT is used and will be asked before any of your information is shared, right? So you have to consent for your information to be shared with ChatGPT. Now, what happens on the ChatGPT side, what happens on the OpenAI side of things, we have no clue. I have heard some rumors. I don't know if those are official statements from Apple. I would love to find out more. I'll probably have to do a little bit more digging around to see if there's more information shared about this because I think this is something that would concern me as a user. Now, nothing against ChatGPT, nothing against OpenAI. I actually use OpenAI, the APIs, and ChatGPT, the product. I have it on my phone, on my iPhone. I use it on a daily basis to get tasks done. But if this is a serious path that Apple is taking, I'm very interested to know how that information is shared, right? Because I think they're also going to add more different types of models, or they're going to make, I believe, I heard a rumor as well that is they're going to make Gemini models available here as well. That will be interesting too, because then how do you decide which of these models to use and when to use them and in which scenarios? Are we going to favor ChatGPT over Gemini, or are we going to provide an interface that allows us to pick that model, right? So that will be interesting because I think that requires some level of automation, and that probably requires a bit of more attention on that user experience and how it would look. This is why I was saying, right, an assistant counting on other assistants is not really an easy problem. It can really break the experience. So I'm very curious how this integration progresses and how Apple is integrating with the rest of the AI ecosystem. So those are just some thoughts. And something that really caught my attention here, right before that ChatGPT integration announcement, you see the word privacy here. This is the first thing that clicked on my mind, right? Privacy, because then there is this information sharing that's happening. And what they claim is that Apple Intelligence is designed to protect your privacy at every step. It's integrating into the core of your iPhone, iPad, and Mac through on device processing. So it's aware of your personal information without collecting your personal information. And with groundbreaking private cloud compute, this is something they emphasize in their announcement. Apple Intelligence can draw on larger server based models running on Apple Silicon to handle more complex requests for you while protecting your privacy. So, indeed, there are larger server based models that Apple can also tap into, right? Their own proprietary models. how does this play into this Siri assistant and all of these kind of integrations that's happening, right? I'm very curious from a user perspective, but also from a product perspective, what's going to be the strategy in the long term. And obviously, privacy is going to be a main thing. You, as the user, want to know where that data is going and how much is being shared as well, because that's the thing. We don't really know what's the context that's being passed. Is there personal information that is being passed? And if so, how is that being passed? How is that kept privately? And so there is a lot of emphasis on privacy here, and that makes complete sense for me. I think it's very smart from Apple to talk about privacy and make privacy a first class citizen in any type of integration that's happening or any of the Apple Intelligence announcements that were made as well, because there is a transfer of information happening here. These models, they do leverage this personal information to create more personalized outputs. So I'm very curious about this, how this moves. If you have any opinions about that, I would love to hear them from you. Leave them in the comments. I'm happy to have a deeper discussion about this in a separate video. But I think it's all exciting news, right? And these are things that we kind of need to think more deeply about. So those are the main news here for the Apple Intelligence announcement. And you can check out the links. There's another link also where they go through all the different announcements that were made under Apple Intelligence, and I'll share the blogs and all the links in the description. Next up, we have this announcement of the ARC-AGI benchmark competition. I think in 2019 it was, yes, that Francois Cholet introduced this excellent ARC-AGI benchmark. And the idea with the benchmark was to create a benchmark that would test these models, these really advanced AI systems, on what seems to be, at least for humans, a very easy task. But this particular benchmark was testing the advanced capabilities of these models. The idea of the ARC benchmark is to measure whether a system can efficiently acquire new skill. Every task in this benchmark is novel. So there's no way that an LLM would be able to use only its memorization skill to solve this particular benchmark. And with LLMs, they are the systems that memorize a lot of rules and patterns and programs, and we can reuse those programs and patterns that the systems have learned to solve a variety of tasks. It turns out that a lot of tasks in the world don't really require more than memorization. This is something that Cholet actually discussed in this podcast that was released recently. So if you want to know more about that, check out the full episode here. And they go through all things like AGI, LLM scaling, limitations with current LLMs, what might be the future of LLMs, and so forth. It's an interesting episode, but they do introduce this ARC competition, and basically what they're offering is $1 million to beat the ARC and restart OpenAGI progress again. And something that really caught my attention is that skill acquisition is not necessarily intelligence acquisition. And I think that resonates a lot with me. I think the systems, what they're doing, these LLMs, they're memorizing patterns, right? They're memorizing things, and they're really good at that. In fact, a lot of deep learning systems are built like that. And so what's going to be the future of LLMs, right? What else do we need to integrate into current systems like LLMs to be able to achieve a more general intelligence system? I think when we say AGI, we want to build a system that can perform tasks, right? Whether it doesn't know too much about how to solve a task, it should be able to, in real time, be able to come up with a program, come up with a template on the fly to be able to solve new and novel tasks. And this is what this benchmark is all about. Up next, we have this new announcement from Luma Labs. They introduced Dream Machine. This is their video generation model. So if you recall, Sora was one of the more popular ones that were released this year in terms of video generation models. And in the last episode of LLM News, we also spoke about Kling, very powerful video generation model. And now we have Dream Machine. Seems like every week we're going to have some announcement on video generation technology. This Dream Machine system can generate 5-second videos, and it says that it can generate 120 frames in 120 seconds. That's blazing fast. And so that's really great, because what we want from these systems is video generators is the ability to do things really fast and iterate on the video that's being generated, because we know they're not perfect, right? So we need the ability to iterate faster. So that's really important that they get right. They also report that they can create action-packed shots, so you can give it an image and then convert that into something that has like motion and looks like a video. And by the way, it's important also that it's consistent. So that's really the key here with any of these video generation models. And I think this is great. The examples are also amazing here. I was talking about consistent characters as well. So when we say consistent, consistent in terms of motion and the scene, but also consistent in terms of the characters as well. So if you are animating a character, right, whatever character that is, it could be a person, could be an animation character. Consistency is really key, right, for anything that relates to video. And so this is something that these models are struggling with. And also at the bottom, very interesting enough, they provide the current limitations as well. So for instance, like morphing, you can see here how this vehicle, it looks really weird when it's kind of going at an angle. That has to do with physical understanding. I don't think these models can do that really well. It was the case also with Sora and the other video generation models. So I think this is something that remains a challenge. Movement as well. You can see this dog going through the scene and there's no movement. Obviously, text is a big deal too, and we can see that also doesn't do well with text. And this one was interesting. You can see that it's the Janus effect. Basically, you get this character and it has a face on opposite sides, which is really interesting. I did not know that video generation models have this problem, but it could be something that needs to be fixed as well. Next up is this blog post by Anthropic. So they released some details on how they think about the character of their large language models, which is Cloud. They basically recorded this video about what should an AI personality be. We are in an era where we're trying to build very useful and safe systems like large language models. And the way we achieve that is by aligning these systems, right, on certain guiding principles. And so one of those things that is really important to get these models to perform well in the real world and to allow people to interact with them and achieve tasks is this idea of personality. So adding a personality to an AI. What this team has done, the Anthropic team, they have kind of provided some thoughts on what they think about personality and how they are aiming to achieve this, rather than things to consider. So there are some really, really interesting thoughts here from a product perspective, right, research perspective as well. But something that really stood out with me when I was reading this is this idea of creating a language model that can be open-minded. It can have certain values, but it can also be open to maybe values that others may have as well and respect that. That is a core capability that this system will have, right? And so they explain how they achieve that. They have some details on how they train their models to have a specific character and personality and how they steer that model to behave a certain way with certain traits. And they cite constitutional AI, which is basically their models to automate the process of aligning the system. And instead of using human data, they would use cloud annotated data. So that's interesting how they have done this and how they trained the preference model on the data that they have generated. So it's synthetic data essentially that they're generating here using the cloud models. It's an interesting one because I think this is something that also applies to the other LLMs and not just necessarily to cloud. And I'm curious what other companies are going to do in terms of how they achieve personality with these AI systems. And this becomes even more important if you're building agents, right? So agents are all about agents that have a specific ability or trait and can reliably and with a certain performance be able to achieve a task. So I think this is going to become important topic when we talk about advanced agent systems or advanced agentic workflows. Next up, we have this paper, and I have two papers I want to highlight here. The first one is self-tuning with LLMs. So they claim to improve an LLM's ability to effectively acquire new knowledge from raw documents through self-teaching. They're proposing three steps. The first step is self-teaching augments documents with a set of knowledge-intensive tasks focusing on memorization, comprehension, and self-reflection. And this is done in a self-supervised manner, and self-teaching trains them all to effectively absorb knowledge. This is all about effectively acquiring new knowledge. The issue we need to understand here is when we train a language model, right? When we have this pre-trained system and we need to tune it, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. Like you can tune the model and it will forget knowledge. Maybe that's something that you want, but maybe that's something that you don't want. And so how do you prevent that? How do you prevent the model from catastrophic forgetting, for instance, right? And maybe there's knowledge it is important for the model to have to be able to perform maybe the task that you're tuning it on. So when you're tuning this model, right, you don't want it to forget the knowledge. You want it to be able to acquire new knowledge and retain the knowledge that it has. And step 2 says the next step then uses the deploy model to acquire knowledge from new documents while reviewing its QA skills. And finally, the model is configured to continually learn using only the new documents. This helps with thorough acquisition of new knowledge. So we kind of reinforce the ability of the model or capability to acquire that new knowledge. And this approach helps to improve factual accuracy, preserve previous knowledge, as I was saying, and achieve superior performance in knowledge acquisition tasks. These are all things that we want, right? Because when we tune a model, we can also be tuning this model in a way that the model forgets facts as well. That could happen too. I think this is a really advanced way of tuning these models. And you can see here the steps that the self-tuning process is actually taking, and there are more results in the paper, so do check that out. The next paper I want to highlight is this SelfGoal, and this basically what it does is presents a framework to enhance an LLM-based agent's capabilities to achieve high-level goals. Something we know that these LLMs can do really well is these foundational tasks. It can do text summarization, it can do information extraction, or it can summarize bits of information, can generate lyrics, can generate emails, can generate all these different types of valuable outputs. But the one thing that these systems are not so great at is things like planning and reasoning and completing or achieving high level goals. Even understanding of those goals as well is really important, right? It's not just about generating. Understanding of those goals will also be important. And so what they're proposing here is this framework. And here they propose to have an agent. And this agent has these different components. So it has a search over the goal tree, and it has a decompose component as well of the composing goals. So the goal tree is basically a tree structure that they are leveraging. So I'll read it for you here. The proposed approach adaptively breaks down high-level goal into a tree structure of practical sub-goals during interaction with the environment. So this agent will interact with the environment, maybe learn something or get some feedback, and then it will have this external tree structure that it can leverage, and it will continue to leverage this tree structure to be able to come up with a fat or a series of sub goals that achieve that particular task. So in this example, the task is minimize the profit gap. So you can see how it's taking that tree structure and going through this path of the goals, sub goals that were selected to achieve that particular task. And so that's really interesting to be able to leverage this external structure. In this case, it's a goal tree, but I think it's a recurrent theme now that these LLMs can be used to leverage tree structures of all sorts to be able to have very advanced capabilities. And in this case, is to achieve high-level goals. We talk about agents in particular. Yes, it's going to be important how to effectively get feedback from the environment and manage that, but also leveraging components like this, these external components that can memorize information, can help us design a nice tree for solving a really complex task to achieve a specific goal, right? A high level goal. And so all of these ideas are really important. I think we are going to see more and more interest in this and developments. Up next, we have this blog, and this is more about vector databases. So this caught my attention because I teach a course on RAGs and prompt engineering, and I often get a lot of questions around vector databases and what's the best vector database out there. My recommendation is usually around two things, how fast that vector database is, potentially how customizable it is sometimes that's important too, and also what's the cost of it. What this blog is talking about is they're doing a comparison between Pinecone and PostgreSQL and Pgvector. So PostgreSQL is a very popular database solution, and Pgvector is basically enabling this type of database to have vector search support, right? And what they're claiming is that they have achieved something that is now faster than Pinecone, 75% cheaper, and 100% open source. I like the open source part because, as I mentioned, sometimes you want to have some level of customization as well in some of the modules that you're using for doing search and the metrics and algorithms and so on. Because I will not go through the entire blog and everything that's proposed here, but they are proposing some ideas, some algorithms that they're using. But one thing I want to highlight here is the speed part, right? The performance. So in terms of like latency, and this one is measured in milliseconds, P95 query latency at 99% recall, they have achieved 62, and compared to Pinecone S1, which is storage optimized, you can see that this is roughly about 1,700. And so that's a staggering difference. And they claim 28x performance gain. And they also claim 16x higher query throughput as well. I mean, that's a significant difference. This is really important if you're storing a lot of vectors in these databases. So they also have this result at 90% recall, and they report 1.4x performance gain. There's another one as well on the cost savings. So they report 75% cost saving as well. Up next, we have an announcement from Mistral AI. They are announcing their 600 million euro in Series B funding. So it's great to see that some of these companies are succeeding and are providing these alternative models and very competitive models, I would say. I've covered a lot of the Mistral models in the LLM news before. So if you're curious about some of the latest developments around Mistral AI, just check out the previous LLM news episodes. But I'm excited for this team. I think they're a very small team as well, and congrats to the team. Up next, we have this new lecture from Karpati. Something that I do in these LLM news episode is I highlight some educational resources for in case any of you are in your learning journey. So the next few will be about education. The first one here from Karpati is he shows how to reproduce GPT-2, which is a 124 million parameter model. And I always like his lectures. He goes into very technical details and explains in a very clear way how he achieves it. And obviously, he has opened this particular project, and I really like his lectures, and I learn a lot from Karpati. Even though I kind of know what the GPT-2 is and the architecture, I still learn a lot based on how he presents this work and how he presents different ideas. He's using also the FindWeb Edu dataset, which is something that I highlighted before. He also talked about evaluation, which is really important as well with LLMs. So do check it out. I think there's a lot to learn here as well. And this one really caught my attention as well. This person, Dabo, created an entire GPT architecture in a spreadsheet. So this is a really creative way of trying to understand the internal workings of a GPT architecture, GPT model. So they claim it's a nanoGPT designed by Karpati. Again, Karpati, you can see he does a lot of these educational resources with about 85K parameters, small enough to be packed into a spreadsheet file. We know that these spreadsheets, they do have certain limitations in terms of size. So that's really interesting. I mean, the project is available here. You can download the file, play with it yourself, right? And it's a spreadsheet. So they claim spreadsheets is all you need. But this is interesting. I like this kind of creative projects. These visualizations allow you to better understand what these models are doing internally. And lastly, I would like to call out my function calling crash course. So I've recorded around 20 minutes of the use of function calling with the OpenAI API. So I go over through some of the features that you're providing, like parallel function calling and function calling for model feedback, because you can also provide the results of a function call to an API, for instance, get back that information from the API and then feed that back to the model. So how would that work with the APIs? There's a way to do it, especially useful for when you're building these advanced conversational agents. I also provide an overview. So I use this kind of slide to provide you more ideas on how to use function calling. I get a lot of questions around function calling. There's not a lot of educational content around this. And also, people are really confused about this particular feature. It's going to be a really important feature, I believe, for extending the capabilities of LLMs, especially if we want to combine them with tools, if we want to build these agentic workflows, tool usage capabilities, function calling features will be really important with LLMs. So I think it's something that people should be familiar with. And that's why I've recorded this crash course for you. And I provide code example as well. You can find that crash course right here on my YouTube. So click on that link and it will take you directly to the video. That's it for this episode of LLM News. Hopefully, there was something interesting for everyone. Catch you in the next one.